want to do a little something for our veterans, and those of you that know a veteran, just to say thank you. That we as a nation have so much to be grateful for here in America, and we owe that to a large part to our veterans who have fought our wars for many, many years. Here in Poen, in our local cemetery, we have guys buried here from the Confederate War, Civil War, all the way up from the Confederate Army, all the way up through Persian Gulf. I want to say that there's somewhere around 90 veterans that are buried in our. There's a lot of veterans buried in our little old cemetery. It's crazy. I have a special place in my heart for veterans. I have some in my family. Growing up in Fort Hood, Texas, you see a lot of them. You grow up with a lot of them, and I'm thankful for our men and women who serve in our military. And I wanted to share a little story with you on our this week's episode of Tracking the Christ Life. I wanted to share a little something with you. This is written by Reverend J. Williams Jones. Reverend Jones was the chaplain of the 13th Virginia Infantry Regiment. I believe this was one of the same regiments that Stonewall Jackson was in. It was from Confederate Military History, Volume 12, The Morale of the Confederate Armies. And this was entitled A Shell at the Church Service. And Chaplain Jones, there with the Confederate Army, he writes this. The morning that Early's brigade was relieved from its perilous position on the north bank of the Rappahannock near the Farquhar White Sulphur Springs, where for 24 hours it faced the whole of Pope's army with an impassable river swollen by a sudden storm in the rear, one of the largest congregations I have ever saw promptly assembled on an intimation that there would be preaching. I never saw the army massed within as small a space at this point. General Lee had purposed crossing his whole army over at the springs and by a rapid march on Warrenton and the railroad to plant himself firmly on General Pope's line of retreat. General Early was thrown across as the advance guard, but as a severe storm made the river unfordable, and as we had no pontoon bridges, the movement had to be abandoned. So men from many other commands, as well as our own, came to our service until, when I stood up to preach, I looked on a great mass of eager listeners. An artillery duel was going on across the river, and an occasional shell would shriek overhead or fall nearby, but the service went on regardless of that strange church music, until, as we were singing the last hymn before the service, an immense rifle shell fell in the center of the congregation, a few feet from where the preacher was standing. It fell between Colonel James A. Walker and Captain Lewis N. Huck of the 13th Virginia, and it found just enough space to wedge its way in between their legs without striking either of them. It was a cap shell. The reverse end struck, and it simply buried itself in the soft ground, threw dirt on all around, but it did not explode. There was, of course, a moving back from that spot, as it was supposed that the shell would explode, but the leader of the singing lost no note. The song was sung through, the preacher announced his text, and the service would have gone on despite the interruption. But Colonel Walker stepped up to the captain and told them that if he would suspend the service, he would move the brigade back under the hill where it would be more sheltered. Accordingly, the announcement was made to the congregation, and we moved back under cover. As we moved out, a shell exploded in an artillery company on our rear and killed or wounded 5 men. The service was resumed, and I preached from the text, "Except ye repent, ye shall all likewise perish," as plainly and as earnestly as I could. At early dawn the next morning, we started on that famous flank march of Jackson's foot cavalry, which culminated in the Battle of Second Manassas, and many of our poor fellows heard their last sermon that day on the Rappahannock. I went back that afternoon to the spot where we held our service and found that after we had moved, at least 20 shells had fallen and exploded in the place occupied by that congregation. It's funny how God knows what we go through. It's funny how God knows what we're going to encounter. And God makes sure that we're taken care of. Just as that group that's having church there on the battlefield, and the shell comes in and lands, God spared every one of those men's lives, even to the point of making it land between their legs, and it didn't harm them. And it gave the commanding officer wisdom to move his troops so that they would not be hurt by anything that would come through, because God knew more would come, and He did not want any man to perish at that moment. He knew that the second battle of Manassas was going to take place. And He knew that these men were marching into that danger. And He knew exactly what word they needed to hear. Unless you repent, you will likewise die in the same manner. Having some men just perish behind them when an artillery shell hit their own artillery and killed and wounded several men. Men probably gave their lives to God that day, not even realizing that their own time would come. Their own day with destiny would end very soon. God knows exactly what we deal with. God knows exactly what we go through. God knows what we encounter. And God is always trying to reach out to us to help us. He knows what bombardment hell's going to throw our way. He knows how we're going to be attacked with the stuff of life. And He's always trying to be one step ahead, 2 steps ahead, to take care of you and I, to make sure that we're well taken care of. We're safe. And if we listen to God, we will be safe. But if we don't listen to God, we won't be. And just as the pastor here from the 13th Virginia, as he spoke to these men, he realized God was sovereign. God has providence. God watches over us. For our veterans that are here today, you did not die in combat because of God's providence. More than once, I've had guys come back from Iraq, Afghanistan, talk to men who came back from Vietnam, Korea, even World War II, who said, I don't understand why I lived and my friends didn't. Know this, that God loved you, and He took care of you. And He makes sure that every one of us have the opportunity to be safe and taken care of, either for this life or that we are prepared for the life that is to come. So trust God. Trust that God knows what He's doing. Trust that God has ordered your steps. Trust that God is watching over you to the point that He'll make sure that you get out of the way before the bad time comes. Or when your day is going to come, He prepares you for it. He gives you the grace you need to face every day and eventually that final day when we go home to be with Him. So don't be afraid, but trust God. Trust that He's got you and He's watching over you and you're going to be all right. God bless you. I pray that you have a great week as you track the Christ life this week. And to all of our veterans, thank you for your service. Thank you for serving our country. And for whatever you have done, thank you for doing it. For guys like me who can't go over there, who've never had that chance to go over there, thank you for serving for me. God bless you. Have a great week.